Delighted to have you along with us. We're going to start off with one of the most interesting stories, I think, across the newspapers today. It's in the Examiner. Pork strife is the headline here. Exclusive in the Irish Examiner by Michael Moynihan that cost overruns, pitch problems and the future of Páirc Uí Chaoimh. And the short story here, as the headline inside the newspaper reveals, with the cost of redeveloping Páirc Uí Chaoimh almost 25 million more than the 86 million estimate, the completion of works following the completion of works last year, Croke Park Stadium director Peter McKenna says that the GA headquarters are going to be taking a hands-on role. They're essentially going to run it, is what's happening here. The stadium, that is, a hands-on role in Cork GA over the next couple of decades. So 86 million was the previous estimate of building works. Prior to that, 70 million was in fact the initial figure, and Páirc Uí Chaoimh as a cost is coming in the direction of 110 million. We're going to get much more chat about this over the course of the morning, but I mean, I'm more than mildly astonished by the story this morning, I have to say. Some of the pieces that stand out from here, and Peter McKenna has given an interview to Michael Moynihan in the Examiner today. He says, I think if it wasn't an aligned setup, i.e. Croke Park and Cork GA having an integral partnership, obviously, he says you'd be talking about receivership or something like that. That's what sort of dire straits we're talking about here in terms of this Páirc Uí Chaoimh redevelopment. And where did the overrun come from? He's asked. McKenna described that as a difficult question to answer. It's the biggest question that jumps out at me from this piece this morning. Who's responsible for this? It does seem as if a plan has been set in train. Another question is when, why exactly when did all this come about? Why are we only hearing about it now? And as I said, who is ultimately responsible for this? It seems as if, people that are involved in Cork County Board at the minute have been very amenable to finding a solution to it in partnership with Croke Park. And it does seem, from reading the piece this morning, that a solution is in train, a solution that's going to take the best part of 2 decades by all accounts. This is not an easy hole to get out of. As I said, it's 40 million over the initial estimate, and the 86 million being the figure post that, and now running to 110. So we're going to hear much more about this story, I suspect. Yeah, we'll be chatting about it in our breakfast menu very shortly as well. It's something that kind of, in a weird way, kind of reminds me of the Dublin situation, which I'll get into a little bit later on. Okay. The Times Ireland edition is next up. Chelsea's new racism shame. Writes Martin Ziegler here, who's the chief sports reporter. Club condemning fans for anti-Semitic chant days after the Sterling controversy. Another episode here involving Chelsea. Second controversy in less than a week, of course. This is from the Europa League match last night in Hungary. And Keane could speak about FAI sacking is the other report there in the Times. John Fallon. On that one, it's the news that Roy Keane is going to be a pundit around Sky's coverage of Liverpool against United at the weekend. And of course, Martin O'Neill has spoken about his departure from the Ireland role, but Roy Keane has yet to do so. So we're going to hear about that on the weekend. I'm flicking through the Irish Independent Sports section here on because I don't know where the front page of it is, the back page. I just opened the back page of it. Is it José Mourinho? Let's go José. José's a lead. I mean, it's not, but that's what's happening inside certainly one page of the Irish Independent this morning. Mourinho must stop throwing players under the tram or he could be next. Sounds like a lead to me. Right, Jonathan Lou there. It's true. If José Mourinho's going to get sacked, it's a big story. Yeah. The Irish Times, meanwhile, that also is not the front page. We're properly organised this morning. Rugby all the way from the Irish Times this morning. Looking ahead to Ulster against Scarlets at Kingspan Stadium tonight from 7:45. And Leinster must do better is the general tone of the coverage that's, and the utterances indeed that have come out of Leinster this week ahead of their Champions Cup game against Bath. The back page of the Sun this morning is vile. Blues fans' new race hate shame, and Klopp slams their brainless chants. So it's their anti-Semitic chants last night in Budapest as they drew 2-2 with Vidi. But the other story here is the Stair. Keeper set to double his money by signing $400k a week deal. So David De Gea, if he's going to put pen to paper on a new Manchester United deal, is going to become the best paid goalkeeper, I should say, in world football. So he'll be up around Alexis Sanchez wages for Manchester United. And it seems that it's the only way they're going to keep David De Gea at this point if they give him that amount of money. The question now is, does David De Gea actually deserve to be the best paid goalkeeper in world football? There's no question that he is still one of the best goalkeepers in world football. Has the trend of what Ederson has done to Manchester City over the last 2 seasons and what
clearly Alisson has done for Liverpool over the last couple of months.
Is the question not who is more important to their team? Is David De Gea the most important player on that Manchester United team?
Well,
Alisson isn't. De Gea may well be.
Well, exactly. There is a situation now where Manchester United are firefighting, and any part of this squad that is a resounding success, and David De Gea is one of those few things they need to keep. They need to do whatever they possibly can to keep that thing in their squad. Like, name any other player that Manchester United have to hold on to, and it's like you could make a case for them to sell pretty much any other player. Luke Shaw probably has to stay given the age player. Dalot has to stay because of the age profile. Eric Bailly clearly has immense amounts of talent, and then
Paul Pogba clearly has to stay.
Well, you could easily make an argument that Paul Pogba needs to go, but that all depends on the managerial situation. So there's very few parts of this Manchester United team at the moment that they need to keep. Of course, Marcus Rashford and Anthony Martial, you would say, have to be.
Well, two players who they were apparently trying to get rid of at the back end of last season.
Which is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Back page of the Mirror is Lucky Boys. Rodgers relieved as Hoops get an unexpected gift from Rosenborg and reach the last 32 despite deserved defeat by group winners Red Bull Salzburg. So big let off for Celtic last night, but they do progress. And there's also a cop of good cheer here as well. This is the Liverpool fans visiting Alder Hey Children's Hospital, and they ran into some Everton fans there as well, but all good humoured stuff from the Liverpool squad and management there. Back page of the Irish Daily Star then this morning is Civil War. Jose fury at lack of support from United Chiefs over signings. Like, we've been speaking about this quite a bit over the past couple of months. That
fatigued by dawn is what I'm
fuming José Mourinho apparently is on a collision course with his bosses over Manchester United's lack of transfer action. So I'm not sure.
I wonder with those stories, right? Do you know where they're just such chewing gum stories, right? In a lot of ways, and they're sort of frivolous enough, and it's great for us. We get stuck into them. We have a great old chat about it and all this sort of stuff. I wonder on a practical level at clubs, do the top brass at United go, oh, Jose, by the way, just like over the coffee machine, oh, I was reading that story, was like, was there anything in that, or have you anything to say? Like, do they just pay no attention to them, or is there some sort of a, so the stories exist. You can be sure that Jose Mourinho is aware of that story this morning, that the people who run Manchester United are aware of that story this morning. So is it just something they go, newspapers, don't worry about that? Or actually is there here, Jose, what's fuming, What's going on?
Or maybe they just don't bump into one another. There is a line in the story here saying that they're not focused on buying anybody in January. They're just focused on selling, despite the fact that they've got a lot of scouts. How many scouts do you think Manchester United have?
Full-time,
I presume.
I'm going to say they must have worldwide.
Well, it just says it here, okay? I don't
18.
know. 18. 58.
Woof.
58 scouts, 3 scouting bosses. Thank you for underestimating the guess, because I was worried you were going to say 100. And it would have just killed the whole thing dead in the water, as people often tend to do. Back page of the Irish Daily Mail is Come On Black, Kiwis favouring Joe as Hansen gets set to quit. Joe Schmidt has said that he is going to take some time out after the Ireland gig, so it seems that that could be the situation. It seems that they're going to need a replacement pretty quickly. Ian Foster must be looking around him at the moment and thinking, God, how's Joe Schmidt going to play this? Because you imagine Foster's got to be right up there in terms of people who might take over. Another story I should mention, by the way, it was on the back of the Star there, and it's on the back of the Irish Daily Mail, is Gareth Farrelly saying, bullying left me in a very dark place. So this is after everything that's happened with Kevin MacDonald at Aston Villa. They've moved the under-23s manager away from working with players due to a bullying investigation, and Gareth Farrelly obviously has been on the record about that, to say it left him in a very, very dark place. At the Racing Post, it's Festival Clues Day, so it is the card that keeps giving winners for March, with no fewer than 15 horses in the past 10 years going on to triumph in the big one. So it's a big one if you're of the racing persuasion, that this is the time when you're like, how am I marking my card for Cheltenham? A good bit of anti-post money going down, I'd imagine. And Test of Metal. Baggies can blunt blades in Steel City Showdown. It's Sheffield United against West Brom at 7:45 p.m. Back page of the Herald this morning is Boys Get Lucky. Favour from Rosenborg gets Celtic into next round. You've got that Kevin MacDonald story there as well, as you do on the back of the Guardian, which is kind of leading the way on this. It's an exclusive, they say, incredibly aggressive. Villa removed MacDonald from coaching over new bullying claims. It's David Conn with the story. And he's spoken to Gareth Farrelly, who's got the incredibly aggressive line. And then, just finally for me, the front page of the Daily Telegraph sports section is Chelsea's fans' new shame. Anti-Semitic chanting at Budapest match comes just 5 days after sterling abuse.
And that is this morning's back pages. So keep your comments coming into us over the next while. That's some Christmas jumper, writes Oisin Staines on YouTube. That jumper needs a strobe light.
It does, yeah.
Says Patrick Mullins.
But yeah, like for televisual reasons, it probably does need a strobe light. People at home really aren't getting the full experience that I'm getting.
I'm aware of that.
It is amazing being here and seeing this up close and personal.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. And just a great show, Brian Donahue.
Yeah, congratulations, Adrian. Your I'm a Celebrity monologue was my favourite part.
Was it a monologue? Right, we've lots of good stuff coming. We're going to get stuck into some of those back pages shortly and some of those stories to give you a little bit more detail on them. But before all of that, we're going to hear from the Keith Andrews Show, which comes your way every single Thursday at lunchtime. An absolutely bumper show yesterday. Graham Souness was on the show, one of Keith Andrews' heroes, to talk Liverpool and all things football as well. But also on was Philly McMahon, the Dublin footballer. Really interesting piece. You can check out the full thing up on offtheball.com. But here's a great story from yesterday's show.
There was a light bulb moment in 2013. I had the cup and I was bringing it to a youth club to do a talk, and I walked into me house and all these kids came over and asked me for my autograph, and I was like, cool, no bother. I went back into the house, got a bit of lunch, came back down, and one of the brothers of the kids I was signing the jersey came over and says, oh, I missed you, can I get an autograph? And I said, yeah, no problem. And he said, are you famous? Are you famous? Looked up at me and I was like, oh, what do I say here? And before I even said yes or no, he said, you must be, you're on telly. And I said, oh yeah, I am. Yeah. And then he said, but hold on, you can't be famous because you're from Ballymun. Right? So I sat down on the pat, right? There was me, the kid and the cup for about 10 minutes. And I'm sure cars driving by were going, what the hell is going on?
Crashing into lampposts.
Crazy, like, yeah. I don't know what I gave that kid that day. I don't know. I hope I gave him something, right? Some little bit of a boost of encouragement from something I said, right? But I felt great. I felt amazing. I felt 3 foot taller. And I remember speaking to a friend of mine who's a personal development coach, and I said it to him, I told him that story, and he said, right, he said, that's what you need to do in life. He said, get as many people as you can on the biggest path as possible and go after that. Because when you're dead and gone, that's what you'll be remembered for. Not how many All-Irelands you have, or what house you have, or what car you have, how much money you have, but how much energy you give people. So that's when I tweaked that sport can be a very powerful thing in terms of a platform to help others. So every chance and every bit of time we have, I'm going to use it.
Yeah, Philly McMahon's just an infinitely interesting character. You can check out that full piece up on offtheball.com, and there's loads of great detail in it and loads of great stuff from Philly. Here's what's happening in the back pages today. Certainly some of the stories that we wanted to bring your way. Damien Duff nearing his Celtic entrance by all accounts. It's a small story by Paul Lennon in the Star today, and Roy Keane possibly talking about his Ireland departure on Sky at the weekend. Liverpool's mastermind is a story that Owen's picked out from one of the newspapers this morning. Hurling is back. I mean, this is utterly ridiculous, but it does return tonight with the pre-season games getting underway. The Porky Queeve redevelopment and the overrun involved there that we mentioned just a little bit, and Dominic Cruz as well. So that's a little bit of a flavour of what's happening. The Star, I think, is the port of call. There's not a huge amount of detail necessarily on the story that Damien Duff is. He went to see Celtic, I think, was kind of the essence of the story here. As Paul Lennon is writing that Damien Duff is close to. Duff lines up, boys move, is the story from Paul Lennon here. His appointment as the Celtic under-20 team coach moved a step closer last night. I mean, it moved a step closer because he was at the game. Obviously, there was the quotes out over the last couple of weeks that he'd swim across the water to get a job at Celtic. And, like, it seems like, I don't know, Damien Duff's profile would, I suspect, allow him to, because we've seen other players do it, get at the very least an assistant manager's job at either a Premier League club or at least a Championship club. But it seems he's quite determined. I mean, if you look at what he's done, obviously, with Shamrock Rovers and how invested he is, actually, is the thing that's kind of surprised me in a lot of ways in his job at Shamrock Rovers and with the players at Shamrock Rovers particularly, and taking this job, which is not a high-profile gig, let's face it. I mean, in terms of, in the grand scheme of things, it's a huge club, obviously. But seems like he's wanting to take each step nice and carefully and actually learn his trade rather than be exposed at the highest level too early.
What's the biggest risk here from a Damien Duff point of view? Going in at the top and being exposed to every sort of failure, or going in at a lower level, like an underage level with Celtic, and perhaps being affected by being out of the spotlight for a little while?
I don't think he's... I think that football culture now is that people understand that... I think that the path that Damien Duff is taking is the correct one. Like, I think that it's difficult to do what Frank Lampard is doing. Like, it's not an easy thing
Seems to be working so far.
It is for him, and like I think that him and Steven Gerrard might be exceptions to the case in a lot of ways. But at the same time, obviously, only time is going to tell if they're going to make a success of that or not. You're asking which will be the biggest risk? I think the biggest risk would be doing what Frank Lampard or Steven Gerrard is doing. Also, I think. By the same time, I think the cleverest thing to do is what Duff is doing, because like he may have had no interest in coaching. He's obviously got the bug now. Like, it's abundantly clear if you listen to him talk about his time at Shamrock Rovers, he loves it and he loves all his players. Like, he's just a step short of saying "me babies" about the lads that are there, but he clearly loves it, and it's clearly a path that he's going down, which is like disappointing for everybody who really loves to hear him speak around his punditry.
See, I'm not so sure that it is the safer thing to do what Damien Duff is doing. I think there is a huge element of risk, because as I say, the stepping out of the spotlight is a pretty big thing. Like, the idea of Steven Gerrard and Frank Lampard going into their jobs, while they're not Premier League jobs, they are still roles that get reported about quite a bit on Sky Sports News, etc. And they are still very much in the public eye. Their profile isn't going anywhere. That if you happen to mess up at a lower level, then you're screwed. Like, imagine if Zinedine Zidane's first managerial role, or his role, instead of taking the Real Madrid senior team, was to go in at underage level with Real Madrid. Like, I know he was involved at that sort of step, but if you take anybody and they go into an underage level and they mess up, then your stock is doomed, really, particularly in that particular football.
Well, I don't know if it is, really. Like, I think there's almost a couple of... Like, it must be very different to manage an under 20 team at Celtic than it is to manage the main team. Like, at Real Madrid, it must be actually a very different skill set. Like, it's a very different requirement from the job. Like,
somebody's going to look at your CV regardless. So if the
but what I'm saying is Duff is out on the training pitch, right, and he's running drills with these lads, and that's what he's doing. He's getting whereas like what Zidane is doing, by and large, is managing a massive bunch of egos. Like, they're just chalk and cheese.
The Zidane example probably is a bad one to bring up. I'm just trying to think of anybody who early in their career had a massive job, early in their managerial career got a massive job, that I think that if you're going to fail, I'm not saying Damien Duff is going to fail, this is me being really pessimistic, but if you're going to fail, then at least fail at the top rather than fail at the bottom, because it's not a situation where, oh, he's out of the public eye there, and if something goes wrong, people are just going to turn a blind eye to it.
So by the same token, are you saying that he needs to go and win everything around him with the Celtic under-20s to have a career after this? Because I don't believe that's the case. I think that ultimately what happens is, particularly with underage teams, it's like, well, the crop wasn't quite right, or if he does succeed, like, you can spin that way, whatever way you want to spin it, because with the best will in the world, there aren't too many massive club owners paying a huge amount of attention to what goes on in Scottish underage football. Like, so it doesn't really matter. For me, I think that whatever happens, if he goes in and makes an unbelievable success that achieves what no other coach has achieved at that level, then obviously it becomes a thing. But conversely, I don't believe that actually if he screws it up, that it makes a blind bit of difference.
And nor should it. Like, I'm not saying it should make a difference. I think that people should be given the benefit of the doubt in terms of having that ability to go in at a lower level and being able to learn from their mistakes. But sometimes football doesn't grant you that sort of respite, the sort of second chance. Now, the thing is this a first chance? Probably not, because it's a little bit away from the public eye. I think it's a smart move by Damien Duff. I just don't think it's as risk-free as some people might say. I think if you're comparing it to, like, I think the big totally conversation about... You think it's totally risk-free?
I think there's nothing...
There's no such thing as a risk-free job in football.
I don't see it ending in any way that, unless he does something outrageous, I don't see it ending in any way that precludes him from getting a gig somewhere else.
So you're saying it's safe?
I think it's safe, and I think it's wise.
Right.
I think it's the Ronan O'Gara approach to coaching. I'm going to go off and...
I would not say the Ronan O'Gara approach is a safe approach.
It's pretty safe.
Well,
I mean, his neck is not on the block at any stage, is kind of the point. Like, and by the way, like, I'm not saying that, I think that's clever and smart.
Would they not rather have the neck? Would he not rather have his neck on the block? Now the thing with Ronan O'Gara is that it's worked out spectacularly. Where people in Racing 92 were saying this guy's amazing, but what happens if those Racing 92 players turned around and said Ronan O'Gara is crap, and he wasn't crap? We are relying on word of mouth largely to gauge how good Ronan O'Gara is as a coach. There is a huge amount of risk in that, no? He has a lack of control. He can't point to the results.
That's grand. And so, like, again, like I'm talking about Duff, everybody that he's worked with has so far come out and spoken very well about him, and, you know, spoken about what an excellent coach he is.
Like, I'm sure it's going to work out for him.
Like, if it didn't work, if they weren't speaking about him like that, he'd probably still get a whole bunch of gigs. Like, there's coaches like that everywhere, that they're just operating at some low level. They're not necessarily the head coach anywhere. Their neck is never on the block. They'll get 15 gigs over the course of their career, enough to keep them in bread and water, and that's it. I think it's low profile in the grand scheme of things. I think that he'd want to screw it up very badly to have any negative impact on his career from there on out. I think it's a good move.
I think it's a good move as well, but not as crazy.
Speaking of managers that have been at sort of more high-profile gigs, and it hasn't always worked out for them, Roy Keane is going to, we understand, speak for the first time this weekend. I mean, I don't know if Sky are that interested in talking about Roy Keane, about his Ireland departure. He's on a analysis for the Liverpool United game at the weekend. Gary Neville is in the studio, and somebody else who I can't remember, and yeah, I don't know. Our Sky is, like, we're all going to be sitting there going, oh, I mean, we'll also be listening to the game and off the ball, obviously, but that notwithstanding, we'll be interested to hear what he has to say about the Ireland gig. I mean, it's possible that they don't give a toss and he just doesn't get asked about it.
Hugely possible.
Yeah.
Usually. I'm interested, though, in Roy Keane's take on Liverpool. Like, I'm sure you'll remember last year he was on ITV duty the night Liverpool beat Qarabag 3-0, and he destroyed Liverpool. He said if they were playing in my back garden, I wouldn't watch them.
Yeah. Well, that's just classic Keane hyperbole, isn't it?
Well, there's hyperbole, and there is saying you wouldn't watch one of the best teams to watch in the Premier League.
That's
in your
classic
back garden.
hyperbole, because if Liverpool were actually playing in his back garden, of course he'd open the curtains.
But the point is, okay, it's hyperbole if the point is that they're boring. Like, so you could say, I wouldn't watch Manchester United in my back garden right now, and you're like, okay, that's hyperbole. But there is an element of truth in it. There's an exaggeration based on the truth. But to say that Liverpool aren't a good team to watch, it's a bit of a ridiculous thing to say.
That's what I'm saying.
Now, we are using hindsight quite a bit here, because I'm trying to think Liverpool Qarabag last season, how good were Liverpool really? Because after Christmas really is when they started to get a lot punchier and a lot better to watch, when the whole system started to come together. But I think it was a bit of a ridiculous statement at the time, that I'm interested to see what he says now, because like there is this idea that he's like, oh, he nails everything he says and he's correct and he just goes above and beyond. Whereas the Liverpool take,
he's very forthright, but he's not always right, or frequently not that interesting. It's frequently...
You don't think he's that interesting?
Well, I think I'm always a lot of... I do too, but I don't think that it's necessarily that insightful as a pundit. I think that there is a lot of hyperbole and a lot of sort of rush to judgment. And I think that his point about, like, his point totally now applies to United. It'll be interesting to see if he says that tonight. I mean, he may well do. It's not as if he's been adverse to slagging off United either.
It'll be a good callback as well. The thing is, how does he influence the kind of Liverpool United dynamic that is so present on Sky Sports? Like, I think he could. The Neville versus Carragher dynamic has been the best part of Sky Sports pundits probably ever. It's probably been the best thing we've seen in UK punditry.
Yeah.
How can, if Roy Keane is available for a longer stint, how can they insert him into that situation? Do they insert him into that situation to add a bit of fire into it?
No. He has no place in that conversation, Roy Keane.
Because of a lack of, because he's not as analytical perhaps as Gary Neville?
He's not doing the work they're doing. I don't see him fitting into that conversation at all. Anyway, it's
what is a substitution on Monday Night Football? So they've subbed in Graham Souness for Gary Neville this season when he's been away.
They frequently sub somebody in, and it's like a Neville plus somebody else and a Carragher plus somebody else. But it's clear that...
Could they do Keane versus Carragher on a Monday night?
On some sort of an ongoing...
Well, you know the way they do Neville versus like in between their brilliant analysis, they've got a good bit of needle between them, or supposed needle. Could they throw Roy Keane into that situation where he'd be able to handle the very good analytical stuff and be able to take Jamie Carragher on in some sort of heated debate? I would like to see that.
I haven't seen the evidence of Roy Keane, the extreme analyst, is what I'm saying.
This is an opportunity, though.
Yeah.
He's never been in that position. Sky is really the first time he's had that opportunity. Like the ITV highlight show isn't really designed for that because they've got so much content to get through.
I'm not having that. I think that Keane and Neville and Carragher were the people who drove that slot. They were the people who said, let's do this.
Nothing wrong with somebody else hopping on a bandwagon.
I'm not having it. Liverpool's mastermind is the next port of call on. This is your story.
If you drop me over the Times Ireland edition this morning, so it's carried from the London Times, where the Liverpool mastermind. Who do you think is the Liverpool mastermind?
I mean, malevolently somewhere in the background, Stephen Gerrard. That's what the article is about?
Well, funnily enough, it's not. It's well, you could have probably guessed it. It's their sporting director, Michael Edwards, who doesn't do interviews, and this isn't an interview with Michael Edwards, but it's still an extremely illuminating piece. There's been pieces done about him before, but he is kind of the hotshot guy who, I guess, has thought about contracts in a way that we haven't thought about contracts before, that football clubs tend not to do, particularly in England. So we had this, the Philippe Coutinho to Barcelona situation, which clearly inside Anfield got to them a bit. They're like, we are not going to become an Arsenal here, where we become a selling club for all the big teams around Europe, or indeed in the Premier League. So Edwards is the genius. I'm not sure can you call him a genius for this move. It seems pretty common sense to me, who stitched in at that £100 million clause. So if Barcelona were to buy another Liverpool player, they'd have to pay an additional £100 million. Now I say that it's common sense, but it's only common sense when you actually see it written down on paper. It's like, that's a bloody good idea, and something other players could think of.
Yeah.
And also the idea of actually nailing down Naby Keita a year before he arrives at Liverpool, knowing that he wasn't going to be available immediately, but making sure there was like a hands-off warning to every other club on Naby Keita. Yeah. There was also the idea of a non-Arsenal clause in Roberto Firmino's contract. We don't know if this exists, but there was some suggestion that it does. So this was after, obviously, the £40 million and £1 bid from Arsenal for Luis Suarez. And Edwards says, we're not having this again. So Firmino got, apparently, we don't know this, but there is some suggestion that he got a non-Arsenal clause in his contract, just a sort of little outside-of-the-box thinking. That
well, that's bitter and twisted sort of thinking. Because, I mean, it doesn't make a huge amount of business sense, actually, when you...
Why does it not make business sense? You're literally keeping your best asset from going to a rival.
No, look, at that point,
one of your best assets.
Point is sound. But like, if in Barcelona's case, if they're looking to come in, let's say Naby Keita doesn't fully work out, right, and he's become a sort of.
And you're saying Barcelona would be interested in a player?
I accept that point. I do accept that point. Let's say, but in some planet that they were willing to come in and pay way over the odds for him. And then suddenly you're lumbered with this, if they had some information, their stats were saying that, look, this guy isn't on that trajectory, but Barcelona were willing to take some sort of a punt on. Look, I don't know. I'm saying, I appreciate it's unlikely, but the same point.
It's highly unlikely. It's close to impossible.
The non-Arsenal clause might be.
Name one Premier League flop. Name one Liverpool flop. Okay, you could say Paulinho. As soon as those words left my mouth, I just remembered. But I don't think that's going to be an issue business-wise. I think business-wise, making sure that none of the top teams in Europe, or as little as the top teams in Europe, can actually poach your assets is a smart business move. So I'm giving credit to Edwards in this, even if you want to have an argument about it. I didn't actually realise this, but they're the third youngest starting 11 in the top flight, Liverpool do, and the nucleus, according to Paul Joyce, is contracted to 2023-24. This guy has set up a business model, if we want to talk about business sense, that has got longevity, that has got quality, and that isn't going away anytime soon. Your friend Harry Redknapp is all to thank for this. So I'm sure you'll know that.
The slightest stone, you know that.
He was the performance analyst with Harry Redknapp at Portsmouth. That's where he got to kind of build up a bit of experience. Now, things haven't always gone well for Michael Edwards at Liverpool. He was there during the Brendan Rodgers era. There is a lot of revisionism going on when it comes to Liverpool and the staff at Liverpool. It's like, well, Jurgen Klopp and everybody that came with him has transformed us into one of the top football clubs in Europe. Actually, no. A lot of the staff were there under Brendan Rodgers. Now, can you call it Brendan Rodgers era a failure? Of course you can't, because that was the last time they went as close as they're going to go this season to winning the Premier League. Well, it is the season after that then.
They may well obviously win the thing.
Now the thing is, there's always nuance to this. Michael Edwards has been responsible for signing someone like Christian Benteke, but it does seem that they've learned from this, and Jurgen Klopp has actually been instrumental in this. So usually when you think about a hierarchy, you think about the sporting director kind of giving instructions down to the manager all the time, and it's a one-way street. Apparently there's a lot of dialogue here, so Jurgen Klopp would have been used to working with a sporting director quite a bit. Borussia Dortmund came in and was like, actually, this is how I like my manager to work with, our sporting director. And apparently Edwards has taken this on board, and they've got three, this is where I'll finish, they've got three fundamental rules about recruitment. So first of all, a player will not be signed if the manager does not want him. Second of all, and this is quite interesting.
That's a sound rule. That's it's not actually always the case. Really,
okay, sound rule.
I'm serious. Like, that's
thank you.
Frequently it happens that sporting director buys a player the manager doesn't want.
Thank you. I thought it was important.
Good rule.
Second rule, the owner has the right to say no at all times.
Bullshit.
I didn't actually know that was the case.
That's
with Fenway
for the
Sports
reasons
Group.
that rule number 1 works, that rule doesn't.
And then the final one is just keeping up to date with the transfer market, but forget that. But the second one, Fenway Sports Group.
Their third rule is we must keep up to date with the transfer market.
Yeah, spotting opportunities and assessing availability, which in turn guides purchases and sales.
Peter Breen says very Liverpool FC heavy show, lol.
Yeah. What's the lol about? Is that like it is Liverpool heavy?
Yeah.
He's not being sarcastic. Anyway, the idea that Fenway have the right to actually veto everything this guy is doing doesn't undermine his role. We can say, what can Manchester United learn from this? Do the board have too much power at Manchester United? Well, yeah. I don't know. It seems that they've got a bit of power here as well. There is obviously talk as well about part of being a good sporting director is not just buying well. It's selling well, and like their 3-year spend from 2016 to the summer 2018 is 390 million, but they've had a net spend only of 125 million pounds, which is much lower than United, than Manchester City, than Arsenal even. So it's making business sense, basically, Adrian. If you want to come back to your phrase.
We mentioned the Kevin McDonald story a little bit earlier on. That's across a lot of the back pages today. And Gareth Farley's claims of bullying and the detail that surrounds that. David Kahn from The Guardian is somebody who's written about this story this week, and he is going to join us on the line in the next few minutes to discuss this story today. It's an interesting one, and I'm sure you'll be interested in it, so we'll bring you that in just a few minutes' time. David Kahn on the way. Hurling is back, by the way. This was something that has certainly taken me by surprise. And what a game for it to be back with. Limerick against Tipperary in the Munster Hurling League, is that the...
the Senior Hurling League.
The Gaelic grounds tonight. It's a brilliant, an epic pairing.
Do you just refer to a Munster Senior Hurling League game as epic?
100%, and I'm standing by it as well. Obviously because it's Limerick, the All-Ireland champions, against Tipperary, who, you know, they're back, baby. It's 8 years since Liam Sheedy led them to the promised land, and he's back, and he's excited about it, and he's talking about having come back to a very different game to the one that he left, which will be kind of interesting to see how that unfolds over the next few months. That, like, even in that shortish enough time, the game has really developed in loads of ways. It's a brand new format for one, and one that he'll not be all that familiar with. That you're going to have to beat a lot more teams, I think, than Tipperary would have had to have done in 2010. And also, even I think from just a general kind of team running and management and conditioning point of view, the game has moved on in leaps and bounds. So it's going to be interesting to see. He is a forward-thinking manager, clearly, and was back in his time as well. So,
but as you say, it's moved on quite a bit. Like, I think that the most interesting element of all of this is how much Tipperary have to really improve from last year.
Yeah.
Now, there were two schools of thought here. There is the first school of thought, which is that Tipperary were actually incredibly unlucky last season. Like, you think about that Clare game, which was one of... It's actually a game that is going to be forgotten. One of the greatest games that is ever going to be forgotten because of the fact that the games that happened after that were so bloody good. Yeah. So, obviously, we had that, really, this scandalous piece of play where Tipperary go up the pitch, hit the post in a goal that would have killed the game, knocked Clare out of the championship, and Clare survived that goal shot. Jake Morris, I think it was. They go up to the other end of the pitch and Ian Galvin scores a goal. Yeah. Clare beat them, Clare survive, Clare go on to the All-Ireland semi-final. Now, the thing is, Tipperary, there's a very good chance they would have gone on to an All-Ireland semi-final had that ball not hit the post. They're the margins we're talking about. Yeah. But as Christy O'Connor is writing about...
Not many saying that they would have won the All-Ireland, though.
But it would have been a vastly different spectrum of Tipperary hurling. Like, it is viewed as a disaster last year summer, and rightly so. They got to the league final. After what happened the previous year, they couldn't compound it with more failure. And, like, they lost an All-Ireland semi-final the year before. How big a failure was it really? They would say that it is a big failure given the players they have. But as I say, Christy O'Connor just cites Brian McDonald's statistical analysis of all 33 games last season. And Tipperary were ranked in the bottom half in 10 of the 12 key categories analysed. So really, the fact that they had an opportunity to survive against Clare doesn't actually represent how bad Tipperary were last season. Yeah. They were poor. Now, the thing is, they've been installed by a lot of bookmakers as second favourites for this year's All-Ireland Championship.
Yeah, really?
Seamus Callanan says they don't deserve that. I think he's right.
I would think he's right. I mean, I don't know if he's saying it for legitimate reasons, but I believe that that's correct.
There is no question that the talent that they have at the very top end is as good as anybody else in the country.
Who are the
favourites? You've put me on the spot here now. I presume Galway or Limerick.
Yeah.
I presume I don't think Limerick are going to be favourites.
So the point being that either Galway or Limerick are being have longer odds than Tipperary.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way of putting it. Now the thing is, like, Sheedy set up a 40-man training squad going into this year's Senior Hurling League. 11 of those players were on that under-21s team that beat Cork actually in this year's championship. So I expect a few other faces. The thing is, as I was just about to say there, at the very top level, there's no question that they have some of the best players in the country, and they can go toe-to-toe with Galway on that level. It's when you get down to the rest of the squad, when you get down to the match day panel, how good are they coming off the bench? Because let's not forget Shane Dowling and the likes of that coming off the bench for Limerick this year. It's now such a pivotal part, particularly the way hurling has gone in terms of a structure and in terms of consecutive games. So that's the thing he's obviously got to work on.
Yeah.
But I'm starting to disbelieve the idea that Tipperary were unlucky last season. They just weren't in the top 3 teams in Munster. Simple as that.
They're certainly not second favourites for Steel Ireland this year. I mean, seems sort of to be overstating their capacity, but
I can see that being played in black and white next September.
Absolutely, with the Christmas jumper on. Can I have the Examiner there, because there's one story we want to retouch on before we
I do not have an Irish Examiner in front of me.
It's the pork strife story that Michael Moynihan writes about the Irish Examiner this morning, and that the debt, I mentioned earlier on, it's a story which absolutely we're going to come back to. The debt on Páirc Uí Chaoimh is soaring towards €110 million. Now that's a figure that was initially estimated at €70 million. It was revised almost to the week last year. The Examiner had run a story. Tony Lean had written that the debt had been revised from 70 million to 86 million, and a year on, following the opening, obviously, of in the interim of the stadium, it's now at 110 million, and it's an exclusive from the Examiner. I don't understand why we haven't heard about this story before, I have to say. Peter McKenna has given a detailed interview to Michael Moynihan in the Examiner, where he talks about the reasons for its overrun. The piece in the Examiner that ran last year gave a bit of a breakdown of the various costs and where they'd come from, and this is why it's in the public interest that the overall cost of the stadium at that time was just over 86 million, and the funding of almost 64 million figure that had been arrived at, available funding at that point, was 30 million from the government, so that's yourself and myself contributing to that. The GAA was contributing a sum of 20 million at that point. County Board had raised funds of 10 million, and Munster Council were going to put almost 4 million to the fund. So that was where it sat at that time. They had to sell off at that point a land bank that they had, I think for 23 million or in the region of that, to try and make up some of that shortfall. But in the meantime, obviously it's overrun that in a very significant way. There's no indication as to who's actually responsible for this, certainly not in the paper this morning, and it will be interesting to see how that develops. And as I said, interesting to know as well why it's only coming to light now that, by all accounts, from the plan that Peter McKenna talks about that have put in place in partnership with the Cork County Board and with Páirc Uí Chaoimh as well, seems to have been a well thought out one and a well developed one, and by all accounts seems to be a sound one from what you can read in the paper this morning. But it does seem to have been in place for some time that we just haven't been aware of. So that's kind of that. Interesting quotes where they talk about the running of the stadium. Peter McKenna says that at the first board meeting, we laid out the problem where the funding streams were going to come from, how we're going to pay that down. So the company is now stable, albeit with a large debt. We're working on a business plan which will take some time, and that some time appears to be in the region of anywhere around sort of 15 plus years. This is a problem that ain't going away too soon.
No, it's weird actually seeing Peter McKenna talk about a stadium that's not Croke Park and that it's going to come under their wing. It's just kind of been this thing that looked perfect from the outset, that the funding was all going to be ideal and it was going to be finished on time, and then there was just a kind of a drip feed of information that things perhaps aren't all as rosy as they seem. So the overspending is huge. The key thing to remember here obviously is that the taxpayers' money hasn't changed. It's still just a 30 million bill.
Yeah,